The stale smell of bleach burned Clara Mercer's nose as she pushed through the double doors of St. Jude Public Hospital. Her heavy work boots squeaked against the slick linoleum floor. It was 3:30 a.m. Her 12-hour shift was over, but the relentless beep of heart monitors still rang in her ears. Blood dried beneath her fingernails. Her eyes burned with exhaustion. She pulled out her phone. The screen's cold blue light hit her face. She logged into her banking app. Available balance, $14.12. Clara swallowed hard. Her throat felt like sandpaper. That was all she had left until Friday. It had to cover 2 days of cheap groceries and her mother's refill of generic dementia medication. She walked 3 blocks through the freezing damp fog to the 24-hour convenience market. The bright fluorescent lights inside buzzed loudly, casting a sickly green hue over the narrow aisles. Clara grabbed a loaf of discounted white bread and a gallon of milk. At the register, an elderly woman stood frozen. She wore a faded tweed coat. Her silver hair was neatly pinned, but her eyes were wide with panic. I know my code," the old woman whispered. Her hands trembled as she pressed the buttons on the card reader. Beep, beep. Transaction declined. "Look, lady, I don't have all night," the store manager barked. His name tag read Robert. He leaned over the counter, his breath smelling of stale coffee and tobacco. "You've been standing here for 5 minutes. If you can't pay, get out. You're holding up the line." "Please," the old woman pleaded, her voice cracking. "Just one more second. I'm buying bread for breakfast." "I don't care," Robert snapped. He snatched the loaf of bread from her hands. "This isn't a charity. Move along before I call the police for loitering." A few shoppers in line murmured softly, turning their heads away. Clara watched the old woman's shoulders slump. The humiliation was heavy, suffocating. Clara knew that look. She saw it every time her own mother, Rosa, lost her memory and panicked in public. Clara stepped forward. She placed her bread and milk on the counter, then pulled out her last wrinkled $5 bill. "How much is her bread?" Clara asked quietly. $3.50, Robert sneered, crossing his arms. "Why? You paying for her?" "Yes," Clara said. She handed him the bill. "Young lady, no," the old woman whispered, clutching her coat. "You don't need to do this." Clara turned to her. She took the woman's cold, trembling hands in her own. Clara looked straight into her panicked eyes. "It's okay," Clara said softly. "You didn't do anything wrong. My mother forgets things too. Take your bread and go home safely." Robert slammed the change onto the counter. "Unbelievable," he muttered. "You employees think you can just break store protocol and create a scene? You're supposed to be scrubbing the back storeroom on your off shifts, not playing savior." Clara straightened her spine. The fatigue vanished, replaced by a sharp spark of anger. "She is a human being, Robert," Clara said, her voice dropping to a firm, lethal quiet. "You don't talk to people like that." "That's it," Robert snapped, pointing a thick finger at the door. "You're fired. Hand over your key card. Don't bother coming back for your shift tomorrow." Clara didn't flinch. She unclipped her key card, dropped it on the counter, and walked out into the cold night alongside the elderly woman. "What is your name, my dear?" the old woman asked as they stood under the flickering street lamp. "Clara," she replied. "Clara Mercer." "I will not forget that name, Clara," the woman said softly before stepping into a waiting black sedan. An hour later, Clara unlocked the door to her cramped rental apartment. The air inside smelled of stale boiled cabbage and damp carpet. Her husband, Marcus Thorne, sat on the sagging sofa. The television screen glowed in the dark room, illuminating his sharp jawline and cold eyes. An empty beer bottle clinked against another as he kicked it aside. "Where have you been?" Marcus asked. He didn't look at her. It's past 4:30 a.m. The kitchen is a mess, and my shirts aren't ironed. Clara closed the door quietly. She didn't want to wake her mother sleeping in the small side room. I just finished a 12-hour trauma shift, Marcus, Clara said, her voice flat. And I lost my cleaning shift at the market. Marcus laughed. It was a dry, cruel sound. He finally stood up, towering over her. He smelled of cologne and cheap beer. You lost the shift? How? He sneered, stepping closer. You can't even hold down a simple maid job on top of your nursing shifts. You are completely useless, Clara. An elderly woman needed help, Clara said, staring directly into his eyes. The manager was abusing her. Marcus stepped into her personal space, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. You played the hero again? Marcus shook his head in disgust. We have bills to pay. My family name is on this lease. Do you think my salary at the firm can cover your stupid mistakes? You're just a low-level nurse, Clara. Without me keeping a roof over your head, you and your sick mother would be living on the street. He turned his back on her and walked toward the bedroom, slamming the door shut behind him. Clara stood alone in the dark hallway. Her body shook, but no tears came. She walked quietly into the small bathroom. She turned on the tap. Cold water splashed against her face, washing away the smell of the hospital and the street. She looked in the mirror. Dark circles bruised the skin beneath her eyes. Her lips were dry and cracked. Clara reached down into her canvas bag. Beneath her stethoscope and medical shears, she pulled out a worn manila folder. Inside was a diploma, Bachelor of Science in Finance and Accounting, University of Illinois, graduated magna cum laude. She stroked the raised gold seal with her thumb. For years ago, she had buried this degree to work flexible nursing shifts so she could care for her dying mother and support Marcus's rising corporate ambitions. She had made herself invisible. She had suffered his cold silences, his sharp insults, and his endless demands. Clara stared at her reflection. The quiet fear in her eyes was fading. In its place, something cold and sharp began to form. She pulled out her notebook and opened a blank page. Step 1, check mother's medical records. Step 2, audit our joint account. Clara locked the bathroom door, sat on the cold tile floor, and began to write. The stale smell of burnt toast hung heavy in the cramped kitchen. Clara Mercer stood by the stove, her eyes stinging from exhaustion after her grueling night shift. On the dining table lay a thick binder. It contained 40 pages of complex financial risk models, cash flow projections, and predictive balance sheets. Marcus had left a copy on his office desk an hour ago. Today was his final interview for business development director at his retail firm. His bosses would applaud his genius. But Marcus had not written a single line. Clara had spent 3 consecutive night shifts sitting on the cold bathroom floor, drafting every calculation on her laptop. She had optimized supply chain margins and mapped inflation risks. She had built his career from scratch while he slept. In return, he left dirty dishes in the sink and cold insults in her ears. Clara wiped the counter and logged into her banking app on her phone. She needed to pay the $400 deposit for her mother's upcoming neurological surgery. The screen refreshed. Joint savings balance, $0. Clara froze. Her breath caught in her chest. $5,000. That was her blood money. 4 years of double nursing shifts, extra cleaning duties, and missed meals. Gone. The front door clicked open. Marcus walked in, humming a cheerful tune. He wore a brand-new Italian wool suit. The sharp scent of expensive cologne and stale scotch filled the narrow hallway. "Why aren't you ready?" Marcus asked, checking his gold watch. "My boss loved the report. The promotion is practically mine. We are celebrating with the senior partners tonight." Clara stood up slowly. Her hands trembled, but her eyes were cold. "Where is the money, Marcus?" Marcus scowled, tossing his keys on the counter. "What money?" "My mother's surgery fund," Clara said, her voice dropping to a lethal quiet. $5,000. The joint account is empty. Marcus poured himself a glass of water. "I moved it. I needed capital for a crypto trade with my buddies at the club. Plus, I paid for the executive drinks last night. You stole my mother's surgery money for gambling and booze." Clara's voice cracked with disbelief. Marcus slammed his glass onto the counter. The glass shattered into sharp shards. "Watch your tone." Marcus snarled, stepping into her personal space. "That money belongs to this household. Your mother is 72 and losing her memory. How much longer will she live anyway? Why waste $5,000 on a brain surgery that won't fix her?" A loud, sharp crack echoed through the room. Clara's palm struck Marcus hard across the face. His head snapped sideways. Silence blanketed the room. Marcus slowly touched his reddened cheek. His eyes burned with venom. "You lay a hand on me?" Marcus whispered, his voice shaking with rage. "You ungrateful bitch. I gave you a home. You are nothing without me. Pack your bags and get out." A heavy knock rattled the front door. 3 deliberate, powerful thuds. Marcus straightened his tie, breathing hard. He marched to the door and yanked it open. "Whatever you're selling." He stopped cold. On the narrow porch stood an elderly woman in a navy wool coat, holding a gold-tipped cane. Beside her stood a younger woman in a sharp charcoal blazer, her dark hair pinned in a sleek bun. Behind them, a black Cadillac sat idling at the curb, its glossy paint shining beneath the pale morning sunlight. "May I help you?" Marcus stuttered, his demeanor instantly shifting. He recognized the younger woman from the local business journals. It was Olivia Montgomery, CEO of Sterling Montgomery Holdings. The older woman walked right past Marcus into the living room. Her sharp eyes swept past the peeling wallpaper and dusty couch until they found Clara. "Clara, Mrs. Evelyn Montgomery," said softly. Clara gasped. "Mrs. Montgomery." "I spent 3 days searching for you, my dear," Evelyn said, taking Clara's cold hands in her own. "My mind failed me at the market, but you treated me with dignity when everyone else turned away." Marcus stared, his mouth hanging open. "You know my wife?" Olivia Montgomery stepped inside. Her polished, leather heels clicked against the old hardwood floor. She walked over to the dining table, where Clara's notebook lay open beside rough financial ledgers. Olivia picked up a handwritten page. She scanned the complex risk formulas and margin graphs. "Did you write these risk models, Clara?" Olivia asked, turning her sharp gaze toward her. "Yes," Clara said firmly. "I did." Olivia looked at Marcus, then back at Clara. A faint, knowing smile touched her lips. "This work is superior to what my senior analysts produce. My mother spoke of your heart. Now I see your brilliance." Olivia pulled a crisp white envelope from her coat and placed it on the table. "Sterling Montgomery is launching a new community investment fund," Olivia declared. "We need a lead financial analyst. The starting salary is 6 figures, with full medical benefits for you and your mother." Marcus gasped. "Wait, this is a mistake. She's just a nurse. I'm the financial expert here. I wrote a 40-page. "You didn't write anything, Marcus," Clara interrupted. Her voice was ice. Clara walked into the bedroom. 5 minutes later, she returned carrying a small black suitcase and leading her mother, Rosa, by the hand. Rosa clutched a small stuffed bear, her eyes calm and trusting. Clara walked to the coffee table. She pulled a folded paper from her pocket and placed it beside Marcus's car keys. It was a signed divorce petition. "You stole my money, Marcus," Clara said, staring directly into his pale eyes. "You stole my credit. but you will never take another day of my life." Clara took her mother's hand and walked out the door. She did not look back as the black Cadillac rolled away into the morning sun. The morning sun streamed through the glass windows of a bright, minimalist apartment. Clara Mercer adjusted her crisp white silk blouse and smoothed the lapels of her dark navy tailored suit. Her long, tired hair was gone, replaced by a sharp, modern bob that framed her jawline. The dark circles under her eyes had faded. Her gaze was steady, calm, and focused. 6 months had passed since Clara walked away from Marcus Thorne and her old life. Her transformation was built on 3 fierce, relentless steps. First came knowledge. Clara threw herself into her new role as financial analyst at Sterling Montgomery Holdings, working 14 hours a day. She spent her nights studying for her chartered financial analyst designation, devouring market reports, and analyzing real estate portfolios. But she did not stay behind a polished mahogany desk. She put on comfortable boots and walked through the dusty streets of low-income neighborhoods. She talked to local shop owners, single mothers, and community leaders. She gathered raw, human data that no glossy spreadsheet could ever capture. Second came financial independence. For the first time in her life, Clara controlled every dollar she earned. She paid for her mother's successful neurological procedure out of her own pocket. Rosa was now living comfortably in a sunlit room, receiving proper care from a warm, professional nurse. Clara no longer worried about depleted bank accounts or stolen savings. Third came her presence. Clara discarded her faded, oversized nursing scrubs and worn coat. She invested in structured blazers, clean leather heels, and sharp silhouettes. She walked with her head high and her shoulders back. The quiet, timid nurse had vanished. In her place stood a woman who knew her worth. At the headquarters of Sterling Montgomery Holdings, the smell of fresh espresso and polished marble filled the grand lobby. Clara stepped out of the elevator on the 45th floor. Her heels clicked with sharp precision against the floor. "Good morning, Miss Mercer," the receptionist smiled, handing her a folder. "Good morning, Sarah," Clara replied warmly. As Clara walked down the executive corridor, eyes followed her. Admiration filled some faces, but venom burned in others. Inside a corner office, Victor Sharp watched Clara through a glass wall. Victor was the director of investment analysis. He wore bespoke suits, carried a degree from an Ivy League business school, and possessed an insatiable ego. He had spent 5 years climbing the corporate ladder, expecting to be named lead director for the upcoming Kowalski Community Redevelopment Project, a massive $200 million initiative. Instead, Olivia Montgomery had assigned Clara as co-lead alongside him. Victor swirled the black coffee in his ceramic mug, his knuckles turning white. He hated Clara. He hated her non-corporate background, her nursing past, and the unshakable trust Olivia placed in her. "She's just a lucky charity case," Victor whispered to his associate, lowering his voice as Clara passed by. A former nurse who smiled at the founder's mother. "She doesn't belong here. She doesn't have the pedigree or the stomach for a deal this big." Over the past 3 months, Victor had quietly spread poison throughout the office. He whispered rumors by the water coolers, hinting that Clara had manipulated Mrs. Evelyn Montgomery and used feminine wiles to bypass HR policies. Clara heard the rumors. She smelled the jealousy in the air, but she never responded with anger or tears. She let her work speak. When Victor presented generic, top-level financial projections for the Kowalski proposal, Clara brought hyper-specific neighborhood risk assessments that saved the firm $3 million in projected overhead. Meanwhile, across town, Marcus Thorne's world was crumbling. Without Clara to secretly draft his reports and analyze his data, Marcus's incompetence was laid bare. At his retail firm, He failed 3 consecutive performance reviews. His presentations were riddled with calculation errors and flawed logic. His promotion was canceled, and his boss placed him on formal probation. To make matters worse, Marcus was drowning in debt. His reckless cryptocurrency trades had collapsed, leaving him with maxed-out credit cards and unpaid bills. Every evening, Marcus sat alone in his messy, silent apartment. The smell of unwashed laundry and stale beer filled the air. He stared at his phone, repeatedly dialing Clara's number, only to hear the same cold, automated recording. The party you are trying to reach has blocked your number. He had lost his ghostwriter, his servant, and his safety net. Back at Sterling Montgomery, the day of the preliminary Kowalski review arrived. The final pitch to international investors was scheduled for the following week, but today, Olivia and the internal board would inspect the complete presentation deck. Victor walked into Clara's office, leaning against her doorframe with a condescending smile. "Big day, Clara," Victor said, his tone dripping with fake warmth. "Are you sure you can handle the financial slide presentation? The board doesn't like nurse-level explanations. If you get nervous, I can handle the talking." Clara did not look up from her laptop screen. She finalized the last column of her cash flow audit, printed the document, and neatly placed it in a leather binder. She stood up, buttoned her navy blazer, and looked Victor straight in the eyes. "Thank you for your concern, Victor," Clara said calmly, her voice smooth and unwavering. "My numbers are solid. Focus on your section. Make sure your yield estimates are accurate this time." Victor's smile tightened into a grim line. "Don't get arrogant, Mercer. High rises aren't hospital wards. One mistake and you fall hard. Then I suggest you don't make one," Clara replied coolly, brushing past him into the hallway. 10 minutes later, Clara stood outside the grand oak doors of the International Conference Room. Inside, the muffled sound of low voices and rustling papers echoed. Through the frosted glass, she could see the dark silhouettes of Olivia Montgomery and the board of directors waiting for the briefing. Clara paused under the warm, recessed lighting. She looked at her reflection in the polished glass panel beside the door. She saw no trace of the broken woman who had wept on a cold bathroom floor 6 months ago. The pain of Marcus's betrayal, the humiliation at the market, and the years of silent suffering were no longer heavy chains holding her down. They were fuel. Clara raised her hand, adjusted the lapels of her navy suit, and smoothed her collar. A quiet, confident smile touched her lips. She turned the silver door handle and walked into the room, ready to claim her destiny. The grand executive conference room of Sterling Montgomery Holdings smelled of expensive Italian leather, polished dark walnut, and fresh espresso. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling glass windows on the 45th floor, illuminating the long, reflective marble table. At the head of the table sat Olivia Montgomery, her posture upright and her expression impassive, radiating quiet authority. Beside her sat Mr. Kowalski and 5 senior representatives from the Kowalski Investment Trust. The room was heavy with anticipation. Everyone present knew what was at stake: a $200 million community redevelopment project that would reshape the city's economic landscape for the next 3 decades. Victor Sharp stood near the digital podium, carefully adjusting the silk tie of his bespoke suit. He offered the board a warm, practiced corporate smile, but his eyes glinted with cold malice whenever he glanced toward Clara Mercer. "Ladies and gentlemen," Victor began, his voice smooth, confident, and echoing off the glass panels. "Today, my team and I present the final financial architecture for the Kowalski Community Redevelopment Project. Over the past 6 months, we have analyzed market trends, zoning regulations, and capital allocation models. My colleague, Clara Mercer, will open our presentation with the core financial projections and return models." Clara stood up, smoothly from her leather armchair. She smoothed the lapels of her navy tailored blazer, adjusted her cuffs, and walked calmly to the front of the room. She held the sleek digital remote in her right hand. She made direct eye contact with Mr. Kowalski, offering a polite nod before turning toward the massive, ultra-high-definition LED screen mounted on the main wall. She pressed the forward button to launch her slide deck. The screen flashed bright blue, then blinked rapidly before displaying a garish, broken layout. Low gasps echoed across the conference room. Instead of the meticulous, balanced financial models Clara had spent 4 months calculating and verifying, the screen presented a chaotic disaster of numbers. The projected return on investment was slashed from a healthy 12% down to an absurd 0.5%. The budget allocation for low-income housing was inflated tenfold, showing an unviable, artificial net loss of $40 million for the primary investors. The entire financial framework looked amateurish, wildly incompetent, and completely broken. Clara felt a single drop of cold sweat trace her spine. The air in her lungs seized. Before she could even check the system feed, Victor immediately stepped forward, placing a hand over his heart in exaggerated dismay. "What is this?" Victor gasped, turning to Olivia and the board with wide, panicked eyes. "Clara, what on earth have you done? This is catastrophic. I warned senior management that hiring a former hospital nurse with no formal corporate track record was a dangerous gamble for a deal of this magnitude. Look at these figures. She has completely butchered our financial analysis and brought shame upon this firm." A heavy, suffocating silence blanketed the room. Mr. Kowalski frowned deeply, his thick gray eyebrows knitting together in frustration. The 5 senior investors exchanged uneasy glances, whispering nervously among themselves and crossing their arms in disappointment. Victor looked toward Clara, and for a split second, a triumphant, venomous smirk flashed across his face. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. Her peripheral vision narrowed. In that fraction of a second, the trap became crystal clear. Victor had used his administrative clearance during the late-night system backup to access her encrypted drive. He had altered her master presentation files, replacing her verified formulas with corrupted data. He wanted to destroy her credibility, humiliate her in front of the board, and force Olivia to remove her from the project permanently. For 3 agonizing seconds, the ghost of her past self whispered in the dark corners of her mind. "You are just a nurse. You are just a maid. You don't belong in this room. You should have stayed in the shadows." Clara closed her eyes. She took one long, slow, grounding breath through her nose. The scent of leather and coffee filled her senses. She remembered the cold, damp tiles of her old bathroom floor. She remembered the empty joint bank account and her mother's missing surgery fund. She remembered the cold rain on the night she gave away her last $3.50 for a loaf of bread. She was no longer that timid, invisible woman who suffered in silence. She was Clara Mercer. She had built her knowledge through blood, sweat, and sleepless nights. Clara opened her eyes. The lingering fear evaporated into nothingness. In its place rose a wall of cold, unshakable ice. She did not cry. She did not tremble. She did not stammer out a pathetic, desperate apology. Clara walked calmly to the front podium. She picked up the master control remote, aimed it directly at the wall, and clicked the display screen completely off. The massive screen went black, plunging the room into momentary gloom before the natural ambient sunlight reclaimed the space. "Miss Mercer?" Mr. Kowalski asked, his deep voice sharp, demanding, and laced with impatience. "What is the meaning of this? Why did you shut down the presentation?" Clara turned around to face the board. Her hands were completely still. She picked up a thick black dry erase marker from the lectern tray and stepped over to the large, pristine whiteboard mounted along the side wall. "The digital file on that server has been corrupted, Mr. Kowalski," Clara said, her voice dropping to a low, crystal-clear frequency that commanded total, undivided attention. "However, I do not require a digital screen to present this project. Unlike Mr. Sharp, who relies on third-party agencies to assemble his slides, I did not sit behind a desk. I walked every single street, alley, and vacant lot in the Kowalski redevelopment zone. I personally audited every commercial lease and municipal tax record. Every single number in this proposal lives in my head." With sharp, decisive movements, Clara uncapped the black marker. The crisp, rhythmic squeak of felt pressing against porcelain echoed through the silent room. Clara drew a massive, perfectly proportioned grid across the board. "Our baseline land acquisition cost across 32 parcels stands at $42,500,000, Clara stated, writing the exact figures quickly and neatly without a second of hesitation. "By leveraging municipal tax abatements under Section 8 of the Urban Revitalization Act, we reduce our initial debt service liability by 12% in year one." She moved smoothly along the wall, drawing cash flow diagrams, debt coverage ratios, and predictive yield curves with absolute mathematical precision. Her handwriting was elegant, precise, and completely unwavering. Regarding the community housing allocation, Clara continued, her voice ringing through the room with absolute authority. "We are allocating 15% of the residential units to low-income families and senior citizens. This is not a $40 million loss, as the corrupted file falsely indicated. By partnering with the State Housing Finance Authority, we secure historic tax credits that offset 92% of the construction cost, generating a stable, risk-free 6% annual yield guaranteed by state subsidies." For 25 uninterrupted minutes, Clara filled the entire whiteboard with complex mathematical formulas, risk mitigation frameworks, and long-term liquidity assessments entirely from memory. She explained the human impact alongside the financial metrics, demonstrating a mastery of real estate development that transcended mere corporate jargon. She laid out the exact timeline, the labor union agreements, the material supply chain hedges, and the projected quarterly dividends for the investors. When she finally placed the black marker back onto the tray, her hands were spotless. Her posture was regal, upright, and proud. The conference room was deathly quiet. You could hear the faint hum of the air conditioner. Mr. Kowalski leaned forward in his leather chair. He adjusted his glasses, staring intently at the whiteboard covered in pristine financial data. Then he looked up at Clara. Slowly, deliberately, Mr. Kowalski began to clap. The sharp sound of his heavy palms clapping resonated against the glass walls. Within seconds, the 5 senior investors joined him, standing up from their seats. Olivia Montgomery sat back in her chair, a quiet, proud smile illuminating her face as she joined the applause. "In 35 years of private equity investing," Mr. Kowalski declared, extending his hand across the table toward Clara, "I have listened to hundreds of polished executives read bullet points off glossy slides. I have never seen anyone command $200 million worth of intricate financial data entirely from memory. You do not just understand this business, Miss Mercer, you embody it. The Kowalski Trust approves your proposal without reservation." Victor Sharp stood frozen, near the podium. His face had drained of all color, turning a sickly ash gray. His mouth hung slightly open, his hands shaking as cold sweat soaked the collar of his expensive shirt. Olivia Montgomery stood up, her cold, steel-gray eyes locking onto Victor. "Internal audit and IT security are already reviewing the server access logs from last night, Victor," Olivia said, her voice dropping like a guillotine. "By the time you return to your desk, security will be waiting to escort you out. The legal team will handle your formal termination for corporate sabotage. That evening, as the sun began its slow descent below the urban skyline, casting long, golden rays across the empty 45th floor, Clara stood alone by the floor-to-ceiling glass wall. The city below glowed in brilliant shades of amber, bronze, and deep gold. Olivia walked quietly into the room, holding two crystal glasses filled with sparkling water. She handed one to Clara and stood beside her, gazing out at the horizon. "Victor attempted to destroy your life today," Olivia said softly, her voice filled with deep respect. "Our legal department has enough evidence to press criminal charges for corporate espionage and data tampering. If you wish, we can ensure he never works in finance again and faces real prison time." Clara looked at her reflection in the glass, then down at the whiteboard where her handwriting still stood proud in the fading light. "No, Olivia," Clara replied quietly, taking a small sip of water. "Do not send him to prison." Olivia turned her head, surprised. "Why? After what he did to you?" "Reassign him to the ground-level survey team for the low-income housing project in the South District," Clara said, her voice steady and peaceful. "Stripped of his title and his corner office. Let him walk those dusty streets for 6 months. Let him talk to the single mothers and the elderly residents. Let him learn the true value of the human beings he spent his life looking down upon." Olivia stared at Clara for a long moment, deeply moved by her wisdom. "You have a rare, beautiful soul, Clara Mercer." Clara smiled gently, watching the golden light dance across the glass. She felt no anger toward Victor. She felt no bitterness toward Marcus or her past. The pain, the betrayal, and the years of silent suffering were no longer heavy chains pulling her into the dark. They were simply the fire that had forged her strength. She stood tall, free, and completely at peace, ready for the world that awaited her. The autumn breeze swept gently across the tree-lined suburban street, carrying the sweet, crisp scent of pine and fallen oak leaves. Sunlight poured down in golden streams, painting the porch of a charming craftsman bungalow in warm, glowing shades of amber. Clara Mercer stood on the front lawn, holding a silver watering can. She wore a simple cream-colored linen dress, her bare feet pressing lightly into the soft green grass. Her skin was radiant, her face relaxed, and her eyes sparkled with quiet contentment. Beside the porch, her mother, Rosa, sat comfortably in a wooden rocking chair. Rosa wore a soft lavender sweater, a light blanket resting over her knees. Her silver hair glowed in the sunlight. She hummed a peaceful melody, her hands gently resting on her lap as she watched a yellow butterfly flutter past the rose bushes. This house was not a grand, imposing mansion. It was the historic cottage where Mrs. Evelyn Montgomery had lived 50 years ago, when she first built her legacy from scratch. 3 months after the Kowalski deal, Evelyn and Olivia had handed Clara the keys, placing the deed in her name and her mother's name. "It is not charity, Clara," Evelyn had told her with a warm smile. "It is an investment in a soul that reminded me who I was." Inside the sunlit living room, sitting on a polished mahogany mantelpiece, rested a small, elegant wooden picture frame. Inside it was no expensive artwork or diploma. It held a preserved paper receipt dated 5 years ago. 1x white bread, $3.50. It was a quiet reminder of where her journey had begun, not with wealth or power, but with a simple act of human kindness. Across town, the consequences of past choices had quietly unfolded. Marcus Thorne stood in line at a local coffee shop, his coat frayed at the cuffs, his eyes dull and bloodshot. Without Clara's intellect to shield him, his career at the retail firm had collapsed entirely. He was unemployed, drowning in debt, and living in a cramped basement apartment. A month ago, he had spotted Clara leaving an executive luncheon downtown. she was stepping into a car, elegant, serene, and surrounded by respected community leaders. Marcus had rushed forward, his voice trembling as he called her name, begging for a second chance. Clara had turned to look at him. There was no anger in her dark eyes, no bitterness, no desire for revenge. She simply looked at him with calm, distant pity, the way one looks at a stranger from a long-forgotten memory. "I loved you once, Marcus," she had said softly, her voice steady as a mountain stream. "I gave you my youth and my heart, but I love myself now. Live your life, and let me live mine." She had closed the car door, leaving Marcus standing alone on the sidewalk, suffocated by the heavy weight of his own regret. Back at the bungalow, the soft chime of an incoming email alerted Clara. She opened her tablet to review the morning updates. Under her leadership as managing director of the Sterling Montgomery Social Impact Fund, the firm had officially launched its medical debt relief initiative and nursing scholarship program. Thousands of low-income families and overworked healthcare workers were receiving second chances. Clara smiled, closing her tablet. She walked over to her car and drove toward the city center for an afternoon site visit. Her destination was St. Jude Public Hospital, the very place where she had spent endless, exhausting nights as a nurse 5 years ago. The hospital corridors still smelled of sharp antiseptic, floor wax, and industrial bleach. The familiar, rhythmic beep-beep of heart monitors echoed through the walls. As Clara walked past the emergency wing, she stopped near the quiet stairwell. Sitting on a metal bench was a young nurse in faded blue scrubs. Her shoulders shook as she wept silently into her hands. Her name badge read Sarah Jenkins. She looked utterly exhausted, broken by a double shift and battered by the cruel words of an angry patient's family. Clara stepped forward softly. The clicking of her heels stopped beside the bench. She reached into her bag, pulled out a warm, fresh cup of chamomile tea, and gently offered it to Sarah. The young nurse looked up, wiping her tear-stained cheeks in embarrassment. I'm sorry. I shouldn't be crying. I'm just so tired. It feels like nobody cares." Clara sat down beside her on the cold bench. She looked at Sarah with deep, undeniable empathy. "I sat on these exact stairs 5 years ago, Sarah," Clara said, her voice rich with warmth and quiet strength. "I thought my life was over. I thought my sacrifice was invisible." Clara pulled a gold-embossed card from her pocket and placed it in Sarah's trembling hand. It was an invitation to the Sterling Montgomery Professional Development Fellowship. "Do not let the darkness of this world convince you that you are small," Clara said softly, holding Sarah's eyes. "Your kindness is a candle. When you use it to light another person's path, your own flame never dims. It simply makes the whole room brighter." Sarah stared at the card, a ray of hope breaking through her tears. "Thank you, Miss Mercer." Clara smiled, patting her shoulder gently, before turning to walk out into the courtyard. The late afternoon sky expanded above her in a breathtaking canvas of deep magenta, violet, and brilliant gold. It was the golden hour. The warm breeze stirred Clara's short hair. She closed her eyes and took one deep, clean breath of fresh air. She felt completely light. The scars on her heart no longer hurt. The painful memories of Marcus, the cold floor, and the cruel manager were gone, transformed into the very foundation of her strength. Clara opened her eyes and looked toward the horizon. She stood tall, proud, and free, bathed in the glowing golden light of a brand new day. All shadows must fade before the truth, and every pain is simply the start of a beautiful rebirth. Always remember, the right to write a new chapter of your life is forever in your hands. If this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment below so we know we're walking this journey together. Hope to see you on the next page.